do you notice a big difference between using a high quality camera or your iPhone when you're filming or shooting or?
So if I take a picture of a sunset with my phone, the photo I get from my phone is going to look 100 times better than the same photo I take with my camera, because my camera is giving me a raw file. It's just giving me whatever I have, all the information, and then it's on me to make that look good. And so most of what we would shoot on my phone would look better immediately, but then you have to do all the editing for photo and video to make it look pretty.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like your phone is skipping that process and just giving you the edited version.
So what's your preference when you go out to sites?
I do all of my photos typically with my camera.
Okay.
I just like my camera because with the camera you have different lenses, and so you can do things that your phone
can't do.
Yeah, it's not even close to being achievable. But then, and my camera is way better for low light. Like the other day we were at Round Mountain with Ken Ross. And we get there before shift change, and the sun still hasn't come up yet. So you have the shovel, the 7495 shovel, loading trucks, and all you have is the shovel light. So it's pretty low light. My camera can do such a better job in that environment. But then most of my videos nowadays that I post on social media that are getting the crazy reach, they're almost all phone videos, just straight from my phone, no edits, nothing.
Fascinating.
Yeah, just here's a clip. Crazy.
Not reinventing the wheel, not having yeah.
Nope, no editing, nothing fancy. I mean, every once in a while I'll post edited clips from the vlog and from what we do, but no, I just post phone clips. Crazy. Wow. And the crazy thing too is with your phone, the stabilization's so good. So, yeah, I use my phone for most everything. Like I could just scroll through my feed right now. I can just show you, phone clip, phone clip, phone clip, phone clip, phone clip. Everything's phone clip. Mm-hmm.
So when you go visit Resolution Copper, you're not going to bring a film crew. You're going to bring your iPhone.
No, I will. So I will bring a film crew for the vlog, but for whatever I post on social media, it'll probably be just for my phone. Yeah. So we do both, but anything that's on Instagram, social media is typically just for my phone. TikTok.
Yeah.
Even though TikTok's about to go away, kids
might be
better find something else.
We never know.
I doubt.
I doubt it too. I think there's too many. There's too many people that rely on it for their income, I think, to take it down. At this point, it's almost unethical.
Well, yeah. Well, you could argue
both ways.
You could argue that both ways. But there's
I go back and forth.
I think 170 million people in the United States on the platform, which is wild. And then they were talking like if they were to sell it, it would sell for like almost $1 trillion. And then it's like, who could even buy it?
Yeah,
Okay, like I don't know, 3 companies, Apple. Maybe 4. Apple, Microsoft, Google, Facebook.
Is there any other companies with $1 trillion valuation? I wouldn't even know.
Not many. Saudi Aramco is said to be past that.
Just let the Saudis buy it.
Well, Aramco is said to be the most valuable company in the world, but its value is who knows. And then there's also like, you have like the Forbes 400 list of the wealthiest people in the world. But at the same time, there are ways to hide money and hide wealth. And it's like the Rothschilds, like they've got it figured out by now on how to hide money. So it's like, is that really accurate? Or are there people potentially worth trillions of dollars? No one knows. And so you can go down so many rabbit holes of how much potentially like the Rothschilds or one of those families is worth. And it's actually pretty interesting to read about.
Oh, yeah.
So whereas like an Elon Musk, his wealth, it's from publicly traded companies. So you can just, okay, how many shares does he have? You can do the math pretty quick. But there's other people. It's like the Mars family, Cargill's. I don't know.
It's all old money.
It's like, how many stashes of gold do they have like buried in the backyard? I don't know.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
That's what I'd be storing my money, either Bitcoin or in gold.
Yeah, a little bit of both.
Yeah.
See
which one wins in the long run.
Yeah, it's probably safe to hedge against both, but
yeah,
I would bet more money on gold than Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely.
Since gold has,
I probably should because I'm in the mining industry. So.
Well, yeah, but Bitcoin mining.
Yeah, that's right.
Gold has a better track record. Gold has been around for thousands of more years than Bitcoin has. So Bitcoin still has a little bit more to prove. The gold. Have you ever been to a gold mine?
No. Nope. I just I know there's a lot of gold mines in Nevada. From my understanding, if Nevada were to be its own country, it'd be the third largest gold producing country in the world alone.
That's what
I think. I'm going off of something that I read a couple of years ago.
No, I
believe that's the case.
I need to look it up because I think I cited a fact like that, but just completely probably incorrectly. But I feel like it could be the richest area in the world in gold, or the most productive area in the world when it comes to gold.
That I have no clue. I don't know.
But I know it's millions and millions and millions of ounces coming out of there every year.
Yeah.
Tens of millions of ounces just out of Nevada.
Between their permitting in Nevada, because I didn't think we'd be talking about gold mining in Nevada, but I believe Nevada is very similar to Michigan, where a lot of the projects are state permits.
Mm-hmm.
And without the gold industry, Nevada would be struggling, from my understanding anyway. So if you're a gold miner, a good place to invest is in Nevada.
Well, and that's the interesting thing about mining in the United States is you have the federal system and federal land, but you also have certain states that are a lot friendlier to mining as well, that because they're more dependent upon mining. It's like Texas with oil and gas. Like Texas with oil and gas, like come on down, because that's how they finance a lot of stuff. Like that's how the state works, is oil and gas. Without oil and gas, Texas wouldn't work. Like for Arizona or Nevada, for some of these states that are really dependent upon natural resources, I feel like they're a little friendly. But then you can go to Arizona and you can still have federal land for these federal permits. So Arizona could be like, come on down, let's keep that copper rolling. But then the feds could say, which has happened with Resolution, with Hermosa, you go down the list. The feds are like, no, we'll call you. We'll call you. Like, I don't know. And when's that going to be? I don't know. We'll call you. It's like, excuse me? What? But it looks like Resolution. I saw something with Resolution.
Yeah, a ninth district court judge upheld their federal land swap. So the Forest Service delayed their decision on making their land swap approved between federal and private land because their deposit sits on federal land. And basically, after the Forest Service delayed their decision, the Ninth Circuit Court upheld a lower court's decision to approve that land swap, which dates back all the way to the Obama administration.
Yeah.
And John McCain, or like the late Senator John McCain, played a big role in making that happen, which is pretty cool when you think about that. They ran against each other at one point, and then at some point they worked together to do something that was good for the state of Arizona. And to add to your point on the federal permitting, a really good case study that needs to be talked about more too, and maybe it's another site for you to visit. There's a project called the Cactus Mine, which is...
I'm excited about that one. I was just looking about it the other day,
And it's only on state and private land. It got permitted within 3 years. It's a brownfield redevelopment project, or I think that's what they call it anyway. And it's within 60 miles of Resolution Copper.
Yeah.
But it got permitted within 3 years, and you have Resolution, just because it's on federal land, is sitting on 10 plus years of permitting.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that Resolution's an underground operation, but you need all the land to make it work.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, the Cactus Mine's interesting.
Or you can sneak into other leases. Who knows?
Well,
to a certain point.
Yeah, but that's what's happened with oil and gas.
Yeah. North Dakota.
Yeah, with horizontal wells is like, hey, wait a minute. The Cactus Mine's interesting because I actually went down there. I've been out at that mine a few years ago.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Yeah. They were doing a lot of the reclamation. They're reclaiming some of the tailings. They had a big tailings impoundment that they were reclaiming when I was down there. Rummel was doing it. So big earth moving project. And I didn't quite understand the scope and scale of it at the time because I was just there to shoot the earth moving for Rummel. But then if you look at it from the air, it's a giant pit.
Yeah.
And it sounds like their plan is to go surface and underground at that operation, which is pretty sweet.
Well, I think, and I'm going off memory here, so because I most of my interactions with Cactus was, the weeks leading up to visiting site, but I believe they're boring a tunnel from the pit. To access the underground deposit, which is fascinating, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. We going back to Kinross, they're doing something similar at the, as the pit gets deeper, I guess the gold ore gets richer. And so they're exploring going underground. And so the portal is essentially at the bottom of the pit. And so instead of moving all of that material, because if you want to get the gold ore down here, you got to move everything above it. which is 2,000 feet potentially of earth. So you just pull out your calculator. And it's like, so what is this worth? And is this even economical? But then if you go underground, you can just chase the good stuff without really having to move any of the bad stuff. And that's what Kennecott, the future of the mine. I believe the real longevity of the mine is the underground portion. And the portal.
'Cause it's open pit.
Yeah, it's open pit, and it's still full bore open pit.
Yeah.
But the portal for underground is way down in the pit.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then it goes way, way, way below the pit, and then the underground portion, they say, is essentially like a dewatering gallery for the pit itself, because it wraps as the pit goes down, it wraps around the pit, and then it pulls all of that water and sends that water out to dewater the pit as well.
Wow.
I could be completely wrong on that.
Oh, you sound like you know what you're talking about on that.
That's the secret. You got to sound like you know what you're talking about.
Exactly. And you got to talk about what you want to actually talk about.
Yeah. But hopefully we'll be able to go to the underground for Rio Tinto at some point.
Oh, yeah. I think I know Resolution's game. I think that'd be fun to do.
Yeah. Resolution's game. Yeah. It's just a matter of.
Well, when you said Rio, I thought of them.
Yeah. Just a matter of making that one happen.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're totally open.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
What were you doing before Better in Our Backyard?
I was actually in project management with a company called Parson Electric out of Minnesota, and I've always been in the construction industry. I was a laborer in college, and then worked warehousing during the winter months. And then I was 21 when I got offered a position to intern with a company to learn how to project manage and estimate, and then I became full-time within a couple months, and out of Duluth, Minnesota. And I didn't know really what mining was until they started sending me out to job sites up on the iron mines in Minnesota. And then and I went to college in Grand Forks at UND, and my family's all from Northwest Minnesota. And Minnesota is interesting in a sense that anyone outside of the Iron Range, which is northeastern Minnesota, most people don't really have a good grasp of mining. They're aware of farming, they're aware of other industries, but a lot of people don't even know that iron mining exists or mining exists at all.
Yeah.
And so once I understood the scope of it, because when I'm kind of going all over the place, but when I was in Grand Forks, my wages were going up every year. I was working for Coca-Cola, and part of the reason why our wages were going up every year without us asking was that they were afraid that they were going to lose us to the oil fields, because that was back when the boom was going on. I went to school there from 2012 to 2014, so it was kind of towards the tail end of the oil boom, and that really gave me a good lesson in economics without having to take economics, which I did. And then when I went to Duluth and I started project managing and started learning how to estimate jobs at iron mine sites, then I just kind of realized the vast scope of the economic impact in a positive way that it had on a city like Duluth and that region.
Yeah. Northeast Minnesota, I feel like, is all just corn and soybeans. Like Fargo-Moorhead.
Northwest?
Northwest. Yeah. That corner. Because we drove.
Yeah, once you get around Crookston.
Yeah.
And on Highway 2.
It's just indefinite corn and soybeans in the summer, at least.
They might, that part of the state might as well be part of Minnesota.
Yeah.
North Dakota.
Yeah.
Once you get there, they think like North Dakotans. They think, they're proud to be Minnesotan, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't even know why I'm saying that, but yeah, you feel like you're in North Dakota already once you hit Crookston.
But the Iron Range, I feel like 99.9% of America has no idea it exists. And yet that one range has really changed the world in a lot of ways, because that was like I've read about Rockefeller, I've read about Carnegie, I've read about the original robber barons, Vanderbilt railroads. All of that industrialization for America required steel. And a lot of that steel originally came from Britain, but then we started to create our own steel. The key ingredient in steel...
I didn't know the Britain part.
Yeah. But the key ingredient to steel is iron ore. We needed iron ore. And coincidentally, we had one of the largest iron ore ranges in the world at the time, which is in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that was mined, brought into Duluth, put on ships, and then brought to the Rust Belt for all the steel mills, which then basically built America, basically helped win World War I, basically helped win World War II, and helped really carry the United States into the modern era, which is wild to think. Like steel, without steel,
we wouldn't win World War II, and
there wouldn't be a modern society. Like I think people just take it for granted. It's like concrete. I mean, there's these fundamental building blocks of everything we know in our world. Well, a lot of it comes down to steel and concrete. And concrete doesn't work without steel. So arguably steel is the more important one. And it's all from this one area, north in Minnesota.
Yeah,
that's not all. There's plenty in Canada and elsewhere now, but that's like, it's still super critical.
The only states that iron ore is produced in right now is Michigan and Minnesota, and Minnesota makes up for 90% of iron ore production in the U.S.
Yeah.
And then I think during World War II, it's either 70% or 76%. 76% of the ore used for steel making during World War II originated from Minnesota.
Really?
So yeah, so Iron Rangers kind of have this joke that, without Iron Range, we wouldn't have won World War II.
Yeah.
So, and that's an interesting thing too about projects across the country, especially ones that, especially projects that are trying to reopen a mine. Now, a lot of times there's a lot of ties to World War II, including Resolution, including Perpetua out of Idaho.
Yeah.
But northeastern Minnesota played a huge role.
Yeah.
And why we won World War II.
How do you get how does Better in Our Backyard even come about?
That's a good question. It's evolved quite a bit the past couple of years. So when it started, I ran for city council in Duluth, and part of the reason why I ran, I was 22, 23. I was pretty naive at the time. I didn't realize what I was getting myself into, but that was good. And part of the reason why I ran was that a lot of the local politicians in Duluth were really villainizing the mining industry in general in northeastern Minnesota. And so it really bothered me. I come from like a union household. My dad's a lifelong Teamster. My grandpa's a lifelong union iron worker before he retired. And, there was, and so then coming to Duluth, there's a heavy presence of the union building trades. And however, there was politicians that publicly wanted to align themselves with them. And, but they were also going against projects like then PolyMet's NorthMet project or Twin Metals Minnesota, which all have PLA agreements, which means that they got to utilize union labor once they're building the mine. And it just it got me going. It put a fire in my belly a little bit to run. And it was taken from my time when I was in Grand Forks. It's like, I don't know if some of these elected officials really truly grasp or understand that without the mining industry, Duluth would hurt.
Wouldn't exist.
Duluth wouldn't exist in general. Yeah. And right now, I mean, they got some other good industries. Manufacturing's good. The tourism industry is strong, but it would, Duluth would be hurting for a while without the mining industry.
Yeah. Yeah. Duluth is like the gateway from the mines to how the iron's transported largely, because most of it goes by barge and ship across the Great Lakes. I take it, like probably some of it's by rail.
I'm pretty sure all of it, essentially. It gets transported by rail into the ore docks.
Yeah, to the ore docks, and then it's all put on these enormous ships that then from there can navigate all the way through the Great Lakes to the steel mills that still remain on like Lake Michigan and over into Pittsburgh, and then it can probably even go abroad from there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I don't know on that one, but. And I've just realized I didn't really answer your question. So after I ran, then there's a couple players in the area that put together seed funding to create an organization called Better in Our Backyard. And then,
and that's how they came to recognize you.
Yeah, because I ran. And then once they had enough money for seed funding, I knew after I ran, I wanted to change my career and get more into the political field and so then I started running it. And its original vision was to be, just tailored to young professionals or like do events at colleges. And that's what we did our first year. And after my first year, my gut was telling me that, this is unsustainable. Like this isn't what's going to take Better in Our Backyard to the next level. And I always had kind of a vision in the back of my mind that this thing could not only thrive in Minnesota, but potentially go national.
Yeah.
And so when COVID hit, it was a good opportunity for us to pivot and change it up and focus a lot on social media.
Who were the original founding members for Better in Our Backyard?
PolyMet, and now known as New Range Copper Nickel, and then a company called Lakehead Constructors out of Superior, Wisconsin. They're one of the biggest contractors in northern Minnesota.
And a lot of their work's iron ore range.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. They specialize in doing a lot of work at the mines and also too for the railroads.
Yeah. So they get together and they say, hey, let's go create this outside organization that can say a lot of the stuff that needs to be said without us saying it. Is that
essentially?
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah. That's
put very simply.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's all good stuff. It's all good stuff that needs to be said. And I think it's a really savvy move on their part.
Absolutely. Well, and I'm trying to word this carefully too, Aaron, because I don't even know if they want me to say that out loud. Yeah, but I mean, that's essentially.
I'll say it for you.
Yeah, but. I mean, yeah, that's essentially, what happened, and because there's a lot of NGOs and they're called non-government organizations. That's technically what I am, and there's a lot of well-funded ones that were created to stop mining, essentially.
Yeah.
A lot, and so industry needed a group to basically respond to them.
Yeah, you're completely outgunned in a lot of ways. There are
a little bit.
There's so many organizations out there all about stop mining, and it's called, which is why I like the better in our backyard, not in my backyard
mentality.
Yeah, NIMBY, not in my backyard. I want to consume at a greater rate than I do today, but I don't want to see any of the impacts anywhere near me. I don't want it to impact
or think
me.
about it.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just going to magically happen.
It's just
this Tesla that's driving down, the cobalt that came for it, the nickel that came from it. I don't care where it came from. It just magically happened.
Yeah.
That's just sometimes what it feels like.
Let's just sweep it all under the rug. And I'm fine with if they say, I'm big into the environment, this and that, and they consume less. And they actually practice what they preach. A lot of times they speak out of both sides of their mouth. I want more, but I don't want it here. Okay. So what happens is then we still have to produce more. Still has to come from somewhere. So where does it come from? Most of the time, other countries, which don't do it nearly as environmentally friendly manner. They don't have nearly the labor laws we do. They don't have nearly the anti-corruption sometimes. And then not only is it typically done in a far worse manner for essentially what they're fighting for, especially from an environmental standpoint, but then it's a national security risk because, cool. So we're going to outsource all of the building blocks for our entire society. Yeah, we're going to go put those in other countries. Okay, cool. Yeah. What happens when the other countries are like, I don't know, rare earth, like we're just going to actually hold on to it a little bit. Oh, really? Like, and then what? And that's essentially what the United States has done for most everything. Like most of our resources now come from abroad, which is pretty terrifying in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah, for sure it is. I mean, one great example too is there's a company out of Idaho called Perpetual Resources. They're trying to permit a project called the Stibnite Gold Project, and they're targeting gold, but one of the byproducts on site is a mineral called antimony, which is used for fire retardants, military applications, ammunitions, and we have zero domestic production of it in the U.S. and 90% of it's controlled by China and Russia. But you could say that for a bunch of other minerals like germanium, gallium.
You just go down the list.
Cobalt, steel making even. I mean, China. Steel making. China's killing us on that.
Vast majority of the global demand for steel comes out of China.
Yeah. And what's even more terrifying is I don't know how many people in society actually are grasping the ramifications that could come from this.
Yeah, or even you look at copper. Okay, cool. We produce a lot of copper in the United States, but we won't smelt it in the United States. So what happens is most of the copper in being produced, especially in Arizona, they put it on trucks, they ship it to a port, they put it on to a boat. The boat goes all the way over to China. China smelts it. They don't care, and then they process
with
it.
coal-fired plants and
they do whatever you
Not
want.
Not that coal's bad. It's just, no. But we hear that in the U.S. We got to get away from it, right?
Smelt it and then put it back on a boat and ship it back to the United States. Okay, cool. So we're producing our copper, but are we producing our copper? No, because we're reliant upon another entity, and it's not even like an anti-China thing. It's just like, why are we trusting anybody else with something so critical? Which is that's the scary part.
Well, it's like I'm probably misquoting this or that saying, but it's like one of those things where you have to take care of yourself before you take care of others.
Yeah.
You got to have your own house in order before you can get other people's house in order, before you help your neighbor. And the same goes for us, I think, with critical minerals and domestic production of anything, whether it's copper, whether it's steel making. we have to have our own house in order before we start looking elsewhere.
Yeah.
I would argue. I mean, to a certain point, I mean, we don't have to, produce and process everything ourselves, but we should have the ability for every mineral that's listed as critical on the USGS. If we have the ability to produce it here in the US, we should at least have one source of that coming here in the US, because I would argue that gives us leverage in the marketplace too.
Well, and it gives us leverage, and it aids our economy and creates jobs.
We could have an industrial revolution. I mean,
really.
I mean, if we were to increase our refining and processing, I mean, that's extremely important. And if we were to increase our mining, and then also too, you combine that with, a manufacturing boom in the EV sector, whether you agree with EVs or not, I mean, as long as we can mine, refine, and manufacture here in the US, I mean, the country as a whole it could be another industrial revolution in its own way.
I think it will be. There's an argument that's made right now that globalization as we know it is unsustainable. And I've read a lot about it, and the argument is pretty sound because of even just birth rates and demographics for a lot of these countries. The world is built on, right now, the whole global model is built on perpetual growth. But the models, the math says, well, population cannot grow indefinitely, and actually, based on current birth rates, will not grow indefinitely,
which is fascinating.
Yes,
nature's taking care of itself.
Well,
in some cases,
wild. And so cool. We had globalization really ushered in post World War II. Globalization is still a very new thing, and so back before World War II, largely you had to create everything you consumed within your borders. World War II comes about. Okay, now we have global peace, and now we have the U.S. Navy sailing the oceans and making the oceans safe. So now we have global trade, and now we can just send stuff back and forth as freely as possible. And now, cool, we can go manufacture wherever we want, because then we can just put it on a ship and send it back over here. But yeah, not sustainable. And so going forward, I think we're going to have to manufacture a ton more in the United States. Then I think it's going to be as much as we were manufacturing, if not more, 100 years ago. And it's like, okay, cool. We're making semiconductor plants now. We're making these EV plants now. Those are the biggest projects in the United States. But I think it's going to get future state a lot simpler. I think we're going to need to smelt more copper in the United States and make more steel in the United States and just produce more from a resource standpoint here. And not manufacture abroad, which then will, in theory, make us way more sustainable as a nation than we have been in a very long time. I think we're fooled into thinking this can just go on forever, but it's like, no, it can't just go on forever. It doesn't work mathematically.
Yeah, well, and even just from I never thought of it that way, by the way, but even just from I would say a logical standpoint, if I'm an elected leader, or if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm building a new EV manufacturing plant or a semiconductor plant, I want to know that the steel beams that are making my building came from the US. I want to know that the copper or whatever mineral is in a semiconductor originated from the US wherever possible. I mean, why wouldn't you want that? And the same goes too with people who are pushing that kind of legislation. Like the other day, like in Minnesota, there's a lot of elected leaders that are pushing for renewable energy and clean energy and trying to be 100% carbon free by 2050. But many of those same elected leaders don't recognize the vast mineral potential within Minnesota. So it's like, okay, well, you want more windmills, you want more solar panels. Why aren't you also advocating to make sure that, don't you want to know that the minerals for the technologies that you are pushing for originate in the US and or originate in your home state, and you can actually create even more good paying jobs on top of the good paying jobs that you're pushing for right now?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you want that? And so it's and you're seeing that across the country where, there are people that are pushing for renewables, or they're pushing for more manufacturing, but for whatever reason, they're not thinking about the raw material portion of it.
And that's the most confusing thing to me about these EV plants. I've been out to a lot of them. They're the biggest biggest project in the United States right now are these EV plants, and they are on
massive.
Yeah, they're massive, but then they're on these wild schedules because they have to start producing by a certain date to get the federal dollars. And I didn't understand that. And then it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So they're on like crazy timelines.
I can't imagine the change orders and the
it doesn't.
Not that matters, but I'm thinking from a PM standpoint.
No,
like all the holy crap. I mean, how many?
There's a lot of people making a lot of money off them. I'll say that much.
Yeah.
For that reason, or losing a lot of money, one or the other. But I see all of this, and I look at this amazing new manufacturing capacity we're adding in the United States. But I can't help but to think, where are you getting the raw inputs from? Because I don't see the new mines getting simultaneously developed, or the new I don't. None of that's happening. Like none of that part of the supply chain is occurring right now in the United States. It's all occurring abroad. So we still end up with arguably the same result. It's like, where are you going to get the resources for this? Where does even the steel come from? It's like, cool. Yeah, EVs. People always go right to like lithium and cobalt, the fun stuff.
Nickel. Yeah.
But it's like, no. They need a way more copper than your everyday car. And it's still a steel car. That's the number one metal within that car. Where's all that coming from? Where's all the good stuff coming from? All still from abroad. And so I just, it's maddening to me. It's maddening.
Well, it is to me too. I mean, it's luckily I've simmered down the past couple of years because eventually you get kind of used to it, but the passion doesn't go away. But to add to your point, I mean, when the Inflation Reduction Act was passed or other pieces of legislation was passed, and when you see all these plants going up, what doesn't make sense is that there are projects that are being stopped across the U.S. Like right now, like for background on the Iron Range. So we've been mining iron ore for 140 years, but within the Duluth complex, Minnesota has an estimated third of the U.S. copper reserves, 95% of U.S. nickel reserves. The other 5% is currently being mined in Michigan via the Eagle mine, which is our only domestic source of nickel, and 80 to 88% of our cobalt reserves. And then we have a plenty amount of platinum group metals. Twin Metals is in a moratorium right now where they can't even go through the permitting process. And the minerals that they're targeting is copper, nickel, and cobalt. Nickel and cobalt are considered critical by the USGS, and the Department of Energy just added copper as a critical material, and platinum group metals too fall in line of the critical mineral list. And so when you're talking about where we're sourcing it from, the manufacturing portion has been great, to your point, the past couple of years, but again to your point, we're not helping projects along. We are in some cases, but we're like there's some good cases that we see, like with projects like Talon Metals or Perpetua or Graphite One out of Alaska. Like the DoD is backing them; they're recognizing their value.
Yeah, well,
but none of that matters until we have permitting reform and. But anyway, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was interrupting
me. Yeah.
I was interrupting you.
No, we're doing it to each other.
It's funny. It gets important when the DoD gets involved. When the DoD starts to say, "Oh shoot, we need graphite. Oh shoot, we need cobalt. Oh shoot, we need nickel." When they make it important,
how long is it going to take the permit? 10 years? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
15 years.
When they start to get involved, stuff starts to happen. It's like, oh, go figure. Oh, okay, you guys realize you need this stuff, and all of this stuff comes from elsewhere, which is national security. Like that is as national security as it gets. It's. I guess,
and it's good they're doing that.
It's good.
Just, but there needs to be a little bit of a reality check here with the permitting too. And I think and they're smart. I mean, people understand it. It is just at the end of the day, it's just really odd that we're pushing for these technologies, but yet we're stopping projects that could produce the minerals for them responsibly, or not even giving them a chance to prove it. Especially in the case of Twin Metals, and and even just last year, I mean, there was multiple projects, including Resolution and Twin, and say New Range Copper Nickel, the NorthMet project. There was 4 or 5 major copper mines that were delayed last year, and so as we're increasing our renewable energy resources, or we're increasing our reliance on those technologies, and we're wanting to build more transmission lines, the demand for copper is going to double by 2035. I don't know where I was going with that, but I mean, to your point, it's
estimated to double by 2035, and yet every report from every mining executive I've seen says it's not possible. It's not mathematically possible at this point to produce the copper we're going to need in a decade. They've all said it, because oil and gas is at least a little bit more flexible. You can go poke holes.
It's extremely more flexible.
Yeah, you can go poke holes pretty quick. You can frack holes pretty quick. You can bring wells online pretty damn quick. A copper mine, it's 5 to 10 years, even if permitting's fast, for just development. like developing something like resolution copper, it just takes so much time and energy to bring something like that online.
Oh yeah.
And so by delaying it within even if permits are fast, this doesn't happen fast. Like this, we need to be building these and developing these resources today, and we won't see it until the next decade typically.
And even with permitting reform,
that's with permitting.
I don't know if people like resolution copper, for example. I mean, I think you said you were from Arizona. I mean, they've technically been in the permitting process for 10 to 12 years, but they've been talking about it since we were in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because what are you, 28, 29?
29.
Yeah, I'm 30. Yeah, they've been, the same goes with the NorthMed project in northeastern Minnesota. I mean, they've been in the permitting process for 20 years. I mean, I was just starting Little League.
Yeah.
When they were trying to permit that project.
I think a lot of it, I've read a lot about it and I've learned a lot about it. It was the EPA good? Yeah. I think it was created with a good intent.
It's good to protect the environment.
It's good. I don't think that's the thing. Like the people, miners, I think, and hunters I've seen, they are more passionate about the environment than anybody I've ever met within a city.
I agree, 100%.
And like by a long shot, by a mile. I don't think anybody would argue like, let's not protect the environment. Let's not care for the environment. But then the way it's been structured and the way it was created, it allows for any group to challenge anything for really any reason. And so you can just lock stuff up in courts for decades, like we've talked about, for really no good reason. I mean, these mines, it's not like they're going to go out there. It's not like you're, balancing corporate power and greed and we're up against the big corporations here. It's like, no, the corporations are the ones saying, hey, like we've gone way above and beyond here. And here's our plan, and it's very well thought out, and here's how we're going to reclaim everything when we're done in 2058 or whatever it is. I mean, it is buttoned up because of the EPA and all these regulations. But then at the same time, it just goes way too far because it's like, okay, cool. They can jump over the bar and no question. But even then you can just still shove it into courts for decades.
Well, and that NGO, I mean, when we talk about corporations being greedy, there's examples of everyone being greedy at some point, right? Or every sector, but those NGOs are just as greedy too, because their business model is to stop projects. If there's not a project or a resolution copper or NorthMed or Twin Metals, or even like with Enbridge with Line 5, which is a pipeline that runs from Superior, Wisconsin all the way to Ontario. If NGOs don't have a project to stop, then they don't have cash coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a couple of years ago, I at one of my winter dinners, a couple of years before you came, earlier this year, John Cherry, he's the former CEO of Polymet, and now just as of today, he got announced as the new incoming CEO of Perpetua Resources. He painted a pretty good picture about how these NGOs are essentially not even really advocacy groups anymore. They're becoming glorified law firms in which they are specializing in stopping a project.
Yeah.
In Minnesota, when Enbridge was trying to replace a pipeline called Line 3, they call it the Line 3 replacement project. When that got completed, the NGO that was trying to stop that project didn't just go away. They basically just switched their focus to another project called Talon Metals,
mm-hmm.
which is targeting high grade nickel,
mm-hmm.
in north central Minnesota. So they're not. I mean, they got to keep the cash coming in, just like any other business, just like BuildWit or just like 3M or just like Target. I mean, they gotta keep the money coming in, and their specialty is to stop a project.
Yeah, and maybe they're started with these ideals that I think everybody would agree upon, like we need to respect the environment, this and that. But what they end up hurting everybody, because again, it's like when you stop a pipeline, are you curtailing consumption of natural gas and petroleum? No, not at all. Okay, congratulations, you stopped the pipeline. Consumption is the exact same. So what happens? Okay, so now for petroleum, for example, we've got to put it on rail cars.
Carbon footprint goes up.
Carbon footprint goes
up.
Cost
of transport goes up.
Cost of transport goes up.
Inflation.
And then who loses? The consumer, the everyday individual.
And disproportionately, lower class citizen or yeah.
And then the more you depress people from an economic standpoint, the less they care about the environment, because now they're more and more just concerned about survival.
I was just going to say they're in survival mode. They're in fight or flight.
And so that, I went out to this coal mine in Queensland, Australia last year, Bravis Natural Resources. If you haven't seen what they're doing online, you should check them out. I think.
Oh, I'd love a good excuse to go out to Australia.
Seriously, I think they are. There's 2 mines in Australia, but that one is the most forward-thinking. One of the most forward-thinking mines I've ever been to. It's
really
it's spectacular.
What makes them different?
They're a coal mine, and they're not afraid about talking about that they're a coal mine. And it's a beautiful coal mine. It's a really well done operation. The camp is absolutely incredible. Fly in, fly out, and their social presence is remarkable. Like, you should check out their social presence on LinkedIn. The stuff they're doing is incredible. I think I pointed them out in my presentation.
I think I remember you mentioning that after I was done speaking, it became a blur for me after that.
No, I get it. But their argument is, it's like, hey, all of this, the 10 plus million tons a year that we generate here goes up to India, because we're part of Adani Group, which is a big Indian company, and it generates power primarily for people in India. This is the best thing we can do for the environment, because if you can give people consistent power and bring these people out of poverty, now they're not just concerned about basic needs, basic survival. They can actually start to think
outside of themselves,
yeah. Because they have their basic needs met, and power is a basic need nowadays. And you think about that, you're like, that makes perfect sense. But yet, we, the beneficiaries of the Industrial Revolution, the beneficiaries of coal, of gas, of oil, of mining, we sit here and say, no. We can benefit from it, and we can have these great lives, but you can't. Really? Like, that's the card we're going to play? And it's almost anti-human in a way. To pursue policies like this. Oh, we don't want, it's called human flourishing. We don't want these humans over here to flourish. But then by depressing these individuals over here, we're actually making the problem worse. Crazy. It's crazy. It pisses me off to see all this unfold.
Well, it gets me going too. I mean, I really can't speak to some of the in-depth stuff that you just talked about, which I find fascinating, and in many ways I agree with you. But the one thing I've noticed with many proposed projects across the country, ironically, whether it's with Resolution Copper in Arizona or whether it's with Twin Metals or North Met, they're all in regions that in rural areas for the most part, where their population has been struggling economically. Like, anytime you look at, let's say if you look at a city, say you look at Nashville, and you take a population from 20 years ago, and let's say it's declined by 10%, to me, that's a sign of a city that's not growing, and which means that, wages are probably steadily going down too, and employment opportunities are obviously going down. The same goes with some of these rural communities that have proposed projects in the area, like Ely, Minnesota. Their population has dropped by over 34% in the last 40 years. The rest of the state of Minnesota has grown by 25%. So that tells me that a lot of people are moving to urban areas because there's not opportunities in some of these rural communities. So the more, to add to your point somewhat to what you said with Australia, is that as long as these projects are delayed in rural communities, so is their economic progress or making an economic comeback, because there's no reason why some of these communities shouldn't be thriving right now.
Yeah, and then also, the cities don't work without the natural resources.
Exactly. Yeah, like when you go see a skyscraper, and I never used to think this way until a couple of years ago, and I'm sure, and it sounds like you think this way too, obviously. And when I see a skyscraper, my first thought is, I wonder how many pits were made to make this skyscraper. Like how much iron ore was taken out, how much copper is in that wiring, how much cement was taken out, how much aggregate did they have to use? Where do they make the steel? Where did they refine the copper? And how many ships did these materials or trucks did it move around in before it became its final product?
Yeah, if you just,
it's fascinating.
If you just look around the room wouldn't exist without oil and gas, mining, forestry. You can look at this entire room. Everything here comes down to and forestry.
If it hasn't been grown,
forestry and agriculture. Yeah, and I have a problem with that phrase because it ignores oil and gas. It's like
I think oil and gas though I would argue is a form of mining.
Yeah, that's what they argue, but it's like no. It's its own world, like oil and gas.
And that's another thing too is I don't think people realize. Okay, like even if we were to hit all of our carbon-free goals, we're still going to need oil and gas for decades.
Yes,
I mean
you don't
just
off.
Yeah,
no, you don't turn it off.
Do you want to say goodbye to plastics?
Yeah.
Like.
Well, or like that
or like
cup wouldn't exist without it.
Or,
that bottle wouldn't, like none of these cords, these cables, this microphone, none of it would exist without oil.
Yeah.
Shoes, everything. So you started, you've built Better in Our Backyard from the very beginning.
Yes. For the most, it wasn't my idea for the name, but the model that you see today.
Yeah. But you've really been the face of the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. I was their first ever hire.
Yeah. And so you said then 2020 and within the past few years it started to shift. How's it shifted?
Well, when, we had it's a good question. I mean, we had a very low budget to work with the first year or two when you compare us to other groups, whether it's NGOs or other pro industry groups. So I had to, I'm a contractor, technically I'm self-employed, and now I prefer it that way. And, cause it gives you flexibility, but, not that matters really, but I had to think very quickly. Cause when COVID hit, my first thought was, okay, if I'm from a funding perspective, if I'm my funders, I'm probably the first that I'm going to cut because we're so new. And so I had to really I felt anyway, no one was pushing me. I just had this sense of urgency that I had to really be quick on my feet and innovate pretty quickly. So when COVID hit, I just started to teach myself how to graphic design. And there was another opportunity too, is when COVID hit, is that a lot of business leaders in the area, a lot of politicians all of a sudden now had free time and they didn't know how to get it together. So I would start, cold emailing, cold calling offices, cold calling, state senators, state reps to get them on Better in Our Backyard with some content. And I would take, like current news or, and we would just, basically how I approached it is how can we be the ESPN of industry is how I looked at it. And then we really just started to really pick up steam in 2020. And then we translate that into 2021. And then around the end of 2021 is when we really started growing quite a bit within the region in terms of our membership. And then I would say in the last 2 years, we've been growing quite a bit outside of Minnesota. We're technically in Arizona now. We represent a company out of Idaho called Perpetual Resources, and we help out Enbridge with their Line 5 advocacy efforts in Michigan and Wisconsin. And obviously we have a strong focus in Minnesota, but the model that we developed, I would argue, is scalable. And, but yeah, it's really, it's been a fascinating couple of years. Like sometimes when people ask me this question, I forget how it all happened because it was, and I'm sure you can relate to this better than I can. There was a couple year period there where there was just this focus because of that urgency where you're kind of just locked in the zone. Like I never reported to an office for those couple of years. I was working, I built it in my living room and you just wake up, and as long as you have a vision and a purpose for it, you don't really need a checklist. You just kind of do it. And you kind of get in this zone where, you start work at 5, 6 in the morning. Next thing you know, you check your clock. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It's like, holy crap, where'd that go? I got to let the dog out and, at least get my workout in, and then you're back to it that evening. And luckily now we've established a brand where I don't have to do that anymore. But in a weird way, it was really gratifying at that time and really fulfilling because we were the underdogs. I mean, we were, when you compare us, to other players, I mean, we weren't supposed to grow like this. I would argue anyway, maybe that was just in my head, but, for the resources that we had at the time and to grow it to it is now, I'm really proud of it. And, but at the same token though, too, the stress around my head is that I know that we've just scratched the surface of our potential as a brand. I know we could do a lot more still yet. Yeah.
I feel like I noticed you all first on LinkedIn. What you're talking about. LinkedIn's amazing, but your LinkedIn presence is pretty phenomenal. And I noticed you all because
not as good as yours yet, but
well, I just had a head start, I guess. I what I like about what you do is I feel like Better in Our Backyard, you say what needs to be said in mining. I don't see it anywhere else. Honestly, I don't see it anywhere else. And I try to say some of this stuff, but I'm not mining. I'm not coming from the industry, and it's like
I think you might be more mining than you think.
Yeah, I am, but it's also frustrating when people are like, thanks for saying what you say. It's like I mean, I appreciate that, but like, why don't you say it? Damn it. Like, and you agree with me. Like, we sit here, we agree all day long, but it's like, so why don't you say it? Because you carry a lot more weight in the industry than I do. Like, I feel like what you say and the messaging you all have, messaging we have, everything we've talked about here, there is nothing controversial about it when it comes to from within the mining industry. I feel like most everybody in mining would agree with the conversation that we've had. And yet you won't find it anywhere. You will not find it anywhere. And I'm sure you have conversations like this in private all the time. Correct me if I'm wrong, but how often do you actually see it public facing?
Well, and you make a great point there. And that's where I've been really fortunate with, the clients that I do work with, is that, it wasn't, they kind of took a risk allowing me to have this kind of messaging too. And that's where I really am thankful to them that they gave me that kind of flexibility and latitude to test it out. And because worst case, it's like, okay, well, maybe we just kind of die and then you go back to the old ways, I guess. I don't know. And I've been fortunate to have that flexibility with the people that I work with.
Well, huge kudos to everybody supporting this effort. It's awesome, but you say it's a huge risk. And okay, if I look at risk from a traditional sense, it's a risk. But is it a risk? Because I think the bigger risk is not saying anything.
I agree with you.
And letting the NGOs just beat the hell out of the industry until it doesn't exist anymore.
I guess the better way, because I agree with what you just said, Aaron. I guess the better way to put it is they went outside their comfort zone to allow it. That's what I mean by and that's admirable in itself, and that's where I got. That's where I was really fortunate. I'm not disagreeing. I'm
hugely supportive of all the companies backing what you're doing.
But it's
massive props.
But I'm trying to add to your point though too. I mean, I think it's across the whole mining industry in general, across the country. I mean, and the globe, quite frankly, is, the mining industry has a tough time talking about themselves, and we should talk about them more. I mean, these are game-changing opportunities. I mean, the average mining wage in Minnesota, last time I checked, and this was 3 years ago before high inflation, was paying in excess of $90,000 a year with benefits. If you were to update those numbers, I wouldn't be surprised if they're in the six figures mark. And then across the country, the average miner makes over $75K a year with bennies. I mean, that's especially if you're making that kind of wage in a rural community. I mean, you could sustain a family on that one income alone.
Well, 100%. And then all the benefits.
I mean, that needs to be talked about. When we shouldn't apologize for that, because not only are you doing that, but you're also creating a product every day that makes our modern life possible. And we shouldn't apologize for that.
Yeah, and you see it like I see it. It's just like the industry is just like headed towards a cliff, and everybody knows it, and yet no one talks about it. And it's like, and not to give us an overly inflated sense of importance, because there are other people talking about it, but it's like, does the whole messaging in the industry really come down to some kids right now? Like, you're 30, I'm 29. I mean, it's like who else? And it's like I'm pretty well connected in this space from like a storytelling standpoint. I mean, like a Keaton Turner is another great example. So there are some others out there. Yeah, I'll throw Keaton a bone.
You used to work with him, right?
Yeah. I'll throw him a bone, but there's not many, but he's not a whole lot older than we are.
I'm sure he just loves hearing that. Yeah.
He's in his 30s, and it's just like, what is going on here? Because this isn't this little thing. This is the fabric of our entire society that we're playing with right now, and it's like, hey, like if now's the time to take a quote unquote risk, I would say
it's now.
Like
it's not even about the modern life stuff. It goes back to the national like when I was talking about antimony before, don't you want as a country the ability to make your own bullets?
Well,
don't you want that?
And the Ukraine deal is a good example. So what Russia has done is incredible, because when they were the Soviet Union, had to manufacture everything within the Soviet Union, because the world had shut them off. And so the world does the same thing, guided by the United States. Let's sanction Russia to death. Russia just says, well, this is actually no different than like all of modern history for us. So we're just going to spool back up our industrial capacity, which is what they've done. They can make like 10 plus times the shells per month in Russia than we could if we had 2 to 3 years to spool up our capacity. It's wild how much more productive they are because they have the supply chain in Russia. They have the resources. They have the manufacturing capacity.
Mm-hmm.
They can make all the shells they need, way more shells than the United States could ever even dream of making right now. It's like, is nobody...
I didn't know that, by the way. I'm actually I'm learning right now.
I learned it the other day, and it's like, wow, that's terrifying. That's really terrifying that they have this capacity that does not exist in our nation and will not exist in our nation for the foreseeable future. And yeah, it's and then it's like, oh, that doesn't matter anymore. You know, we don't get into wars, this and that. It's like, okay, well, have you looked at the world lately? Have you looked around? Like, have you read a newspaper? I actually don't read newspapers. Full of junk nowadays. But be on the internet.
I read them on the phone.
yeah, it's just so where do you go? Where does the organization go from here?
Well, I think right now, I mean, it's, you know, there's something to be said, and I'm sure you appreciate this when you're building BuildWith. There's some, you know, you have to take care of the people who are taking care of you now, and then with an eye for the future though too. And but long term, I see us going very national, and you know, because like I said earlier, I think the model is scalable, and but we're also at a point though too where the last couple of years I've realized I can't be the hero at everything, and so you know, like when we were having our discussions earlier, the biggest thing that I got to learn how to do is I didn't realize delegating is an actual skill set. Mm-hmm. And I'm learning that now. And so I think the next step for us is, personally for me, to develop my personal skill set on making sure that we delegate the right way so that I have more time to think creatively and strategically. And but yeah, I would say long term, it's to go national. And again, back to, you know, the people I worked with in the past, I've been very fortunate that, you know, some of the groups that I work with in Minnesota, they could be selfish and just say, hey, stay here, you know, and not go anywhere else. And they've allowed me to venture out, or at least I shouldn't say allow, but they've given me the blessing to go out and seek out opportunities outside of Minnesota.
The projects and the companies you have supporting the cause, I only know about them because of Better in Our Backyard. I wouldn't know about them otherwise. And I feel like
really, I appreciate that. It's a have a compliment.
Honestly, though,
thank you.
Like I would say I'm pretty well connected in this space, and I hear about a lot of stuff. And I mean, I reach 30 million people a month on just Instagram, and a lot of people send me stuff, and I have hundreds of messages and pictures from all minds and a lot of accidents. I don't share them.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. That's not.
I see a lot of boo-boos on the internet. They're getting out there, regardless of your phone policy, FYI. But yeah, I wouldn't know nearly as much as I do about even resolution if it weren't for you all talking about it, and Twin Metals and all of these projects, I wouldn't know about.
I appreciate it. Yeah, that means a lot. I mean that it's, whenever I hear that, that's like one of the best compliments. Sorry, I know I'm interrupting, but yeah, one of the best compliments I hear from my members is, yeah, we talk about you in the office all the time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, but that was when I spoke with you all in January. That was essentially, and I don't know if I did a good enough job at it, but that's like the plea is like, everybody here needs to talk about this.
Or and tell their personal story, you know?
Yes, or else all of this goes away. All of this will go away if we don't stand up for ourselves and talk about what's going on here. We can be the best mining companies in the world. We can have the best ore body in the world. None of that matters if we don't talk about it. And even after the presentation, somebody showed me a picture. They toured one of the iron mines, and it was one of their kids, just smiling, ear to ear, out at the. And I feel like they might have even let him hit the shot. I feel like it was watching.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. And I asked him, I was like, why don't you share that? He's like, I can't, because the mine won't let me. And it's like, did you just hear yourself say that? That's the fucking problem right there. That's the problem. Because that is such a special moment. That is the best representation of mining we could get, the best representation in the iron ore range, what these companies are doing. Well, but we can't share it. It's like, but why? Why can't we share it? Because that's what we need to share. And not to criticize him. He's just
no.
He's in this system that doesn't allow him to share it. But it's like, that's the problem.
Well, and it makes you wonder too, how did we get here? I mean, why why did we get bad at? Because I mean, these groups that are looking to stop mining, they haven't been around forever.
It's easier.
How did we get to that point?
It's easier. And I didn't understand this until, again, I went to Australia. I went to what was probably going to be the last greenfield coal mine in Australia. And it's not even thermal coal. It's all met coal for steel making, and all goes to China. Steel making, steel production, not all of it. I don't know where the hell it goes, actually. I'm speaking out of my ass right now. But it's all met coal. And what they're doing is incredible. This is another mine that if you ever go out there, I could not recommend more. I think it is the example for modern mining. It is so extraordinary of a place. But I was talking to somebody there, and they basically explained to me, you would think that the other coal mines would go to bat for us when we're getting our permit. But it's the opposite, because they don't want to draw attention to themselves. So if they have their permits, if they have their operations, they're just going to retract. And they don't want any attention. We're just going to hide. We don't want anybody to know what the heck's going on here. We don't want any scrutiny. We don't want any protesters. We don't want anything. And so instead of going to bat for the other companies doing what they're doing, actually, and they're not competitors, they're all, in theory, they're all building each other up, or they should be building each other.
Well, we're kind of at that stage where we have to.
Instead,
even if we are competing,
it's like, you know what? I don't want any trouble. So I'm just going to go. And I don't blame them. Because that's the far easier thing to do from a PR standpoint, legal standpoint, whatever it is. But that's what's happened. And so these mining companies, they get their permits.
But in the long run, though, is that a winning strategy?
No, it's not.
It's not.
No. And they know that. But
because eventually, even though you have permits, they're going to come after you.
Yes, but then you look at the makeup of some of these mining companies and some of these boards and executive teams. Are they spring chickens? Spring chickens. Most everybody. I mean, half of the mining industry is expected to retire this decade. 50% of the workforce,
which is terrifying.
That's terrifying. That's a whole
it's almost
other
as terrifying
conversation.
as the critical mineral production.
Terrifying. But and so, are you thinking about the future? Like, I don't blame them at the same time either. It's like, I'm out of here in 4 years. I've just got to make it 4 years.
You have to think though that they are, because and now we're just theorizing or whatever. But I'm just thinking of it from their perspective, like, people who have that kind of success generally have a concern about their legacy. And so you have to think that they're thinking past their, right?
You'd think so.
You think so?
You'd think so. And I'm not
disagreeing. I'm just talking this through.
Brush.
Yeah. But I'm just
super broad.
You have to think.
You'd think so. And so it's like, that's the question. Hey, okay, cool. You're out of here. But what's the legacy you're going to leave behind? The legacy as of right now, at the macro level, is that the mining industry in the United States is in the past. It's not the future. That is the direction we're headed in right now. But it has to be the future if the United States is going to succeed long term. So what is it? And that's what's scary. That's the reality. I think I really think it is that serious. The future of the United States does not exist without a strong mining industry, without a strong natural resources industry. But yet the path we're on right now is not strong. It is the opposite of strong, if anything.
I agree. And we're seeing, I'm seeing certain signs where that's changing a little bit. But it's still, I would argue it's not working fast enough. Like even just this morning, the Department of Energy announced that they're awarding from what my understanding, it's like a low interest, almost no interest loan in excess of $2 billion to the Thacker Pass project out of Nevada.
Well, go figure, because they've spent tens of billions of dollars over here on these new EV plants.
Yeah, and then now they're doing that, and so those are good things to see, and that's good things to build on. But I would argue it's still not aggressive enough, and so you're seeing some good things, like the DoD has been backing projects like Graphite One, Perpetua, Talon. They've backed I believe it's called a lithium company in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. They're doing some certain things. They're doing some good things. They're saying the right things. But at the end of the day, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. There has to be real permitting reform, and it's an odd one, Aaron, because we're seeing good signs, but to your point, at the end of the day, it's not moving fast enough, and sometimes I wonder if we're too late.
I hope not. I don't think we are, but I also think things are going to have to get worse before they get better, and that's not the most.
Which is terrifying in itself too, because this is another thought I've had is you look at some of these mines, especially when they're around World War II, it was almost out of necessity that, okay, we have to get stibnite open in Idaho. We have to get X iron mine open in Minnesota. And there's really no process back then to make sure that it was done environmentally friendly. So what if we get to a point where crap hits the fan and we just end up, we go from taking 15 years to permit a project to getting a project through the permitting process in 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
And you rush everything. And then we're repeating the errors of our past. That's another concern I have too, because we have the minerals here. A lot of them, at some point or another, because history repeats itself, whether it's with wars, whether it's with revolutions, at some point these minerals will be mined. It's just, how are we going to do it? And what's the timeline? And there's no really balance here. And I think that balance is what we're seeing in Australia and Canada is that, okay, they're recognizing a resource and they're making sure that it's done in an environmentally friendly way, and they're permitting a project anywhere from 2 to 5 years, and not that's 15 to 20.
I think Australia, Canada, and then Chile, way ahead. Peru, in a way, way ahead in that realm. But I think what they have going for them is a significant part of their economy is dependent upon natural resources. A significant part of our economy is dependent on natural resources, mostly oil and gas, though. And a significant part of our economy is dependent upon natural resources, but we've just put all of that elsewhere. Whereas, like a Chile, their government doesn't function without copper. Australia, their government doesn't function without the gold, the coal, the iron ore. Canada, Canada is just loaded with all kinds of fun stuff up there. I mean, it's amazing. And you even go to Australia, and mining is just even from like a public standpoint, just looked at completely differently. Or Chile,
I've heard that before.
Yeah, because
I don't know intimately, but I've heard that before from others.
I just think it's because the industry is more accessible and more. They talk about it more because just more people are involved in it, and it's a big part of the economy. And I think they've just done a better job talking about it. I think the Australian companies, they're the example. They're the gold standard. The Chilean companies, they're the example. They're the gold standard from how much they talk about it, how they engage in the community, and I think how they've positioned themselves. And so I'm really I go to a place like Australia, I'm really optimistic because it's like, this is what it could be. This is what it has to be to get to where we need to go. It's just a matter of, when does this happen? And I don't know.
And the community portion is a big piece of that. To your point, like, you have to have trust with the communities, and back to the frustrations. I mean, it's I can't speak as intimately with other states, but I know in northeastern Minnesota, you go to those communities on the Iron Range. I mean, I would argue that 80 to 85% of the population, they want to see Twin Metals go through. They want to see the North Met project go through, but you're not seeing that in the Twin Cities or the urban areas. There's a big disconnect between rural and urban across the country on these kind of things. And because the communities get it, they understand what these projects mean and what these industries mean,
And the point on that I try to make to these mining companies, I think everybody at mines will say, society's just so disconnected. And it's like, yeah, they are. And that's your fault. That's your fault. Who else is going to, and we can sit here and and it's the same thing in construction. It's like, we can be right about the next generation being lazy. I don't think anybody's arguing that society's disconnected, but what is Superman gonna swoop down from the sky and give everybody this amazing awareness of what natural resources do for their everyday life next week, and then the problem's solved? No. Who's gonna do that? Look in the mirror. It's you. Nothing's gonna change until they even just start to help connect the dots as far as what natural resources do for people's lives. Your life would not be anything without this work. And so even just big picture, just continuing to educate people about what the heck mining does. I mean, how many mining companies are on social media? Not many.
Well, not to correct it, most of them are, but it's their
How many?
It's very corporate-y.
Yeah, let me rephrase that. How many mining companies are talking about mining on social media?
I probably shouldn't say that considering that they pay my bills, but yeah.
How many mining companies are talking about mining on social media? Not many. And I understand the tightrope that they are on. They have shareholders. They have these ESG goals.
They got a lot of different
They
things.
have to meet for their financing. Cool. Yeah, I understand the realities of I won't even say understand it. I kind of get it from my perspective. But at the same time, it's like, hey, our whole social strategy cannot be people looking at plants, because that's not what we do. You don't make any money by looking at plants. You make money by pulling stuff out of the ground, pulling critical stuff out of the ground and handing it off to society. That's the business. So it's like, let's talk about that. And I think it's, in a way, it's not a bad way, but it's like, it's disrespectful not to talk about the work and the hard work and the miners out there making it happen, because those are the people driving our economy.
Well, and how fulfilling the work is too. I mean, it's, I never technically worked as a miner, but I tell you, like when I worked as a laborer in construction, I mean, some of my most satisfying days was getting home from a long day of work. Like your shirt's drenched in sweat and dust and you look like crap, but you feel really good about what you got done for the day. You actually saw what you accomplished. Yeah. And I miss that. In many ways, that's what I miss personally about working in the construction industry, and that feeling of fulfillment, knowing that you put in a good hard day's work that you can be proud of. And the same goes with the mining industry.
Well, but there's also a lot of people working at mines right now that they just drive a truck. They just work at a mine and they're miserable. I've been to a lot of mines with a lot of miserable people.
Really?
Yeah.
That's too bad.
No, it is too bad.
It is too bad whenever you see it.
Because
in any industry.
Well, they've lost sight of why they're doing what they're doing in a lot of ways.
Which is easy to do.
It's not, it's so easy to do. And it's not black and white. That's not the only reason. But they've lost sight of the importance of what they do. They just drive a truck. It's like, no. You don't just drive a truck. You are mining iron ore. This iron ore goes to these steel mills. These steel mills produce XYZ goods that all of society could not live without. That's critical. If you don't do your job, the community grinds to a halt. Wow.
And back to your point earlier when you're talking about the mining companies, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, well, and I would argue that's a value of, it's a good leadership quality is for the companies to remind them, this is what if that's what you're seeing, I mean, I would argue that actually that kind of falls on the companies a little bit to remind them, this is why you're waking up every day.
This all falls on the companies. There's no one else.
You can touch on that.
There's no one else unless like of this army that's readying themselves to go out and create all the change we need behind the scenes, and they're gonna, pop up next week and solve all our problems. I don't see how that happens.
I don't know either.
I'm just passionate about this subject.
Oh, I can tell.
Yeah.
I can tell. I mean, this stuff is fun. I mean, I wouldn't be here talking with you if I didn't find it fun. And no, there's definitely a lot of room for improvement, and including, you've said a lot of nice things about Better in Our Backyard, but I mean, I see what you do with BuildWit and, growing your following, and, it's just a constant reminder that, my association, and that's on me as the leader of the group, is that, we've only scratched the surface of our potential. You're posting a lot of videos and photos, and we do a lot of graphics, but it's like for every graphic we post, I want to post a video too, or, maybe have a podcast like this someday. So, even if you are doing a good job, there's, even if the mining industry was doing as good of a job as we want them to, there's always going to be room for improvement and how we can be better.
Totally. Yeah. No, like I said, I'm so stoked about where you all go over the next few years. It should be quite a bit of fun.
Well, hopefully you play a role in that somehow, or when we're working together. And
I'd love to,
because I love your brand and how you do things, and definitely forces me to think bigger, because I thought for a while there I was doing pretty good, and then seeing your work really humbled me, which is partly why I invited you out to the winter dinners. I think it's healthy to think bigger, and because that's what motivates a guy every day.
Yeah.
Or gal.
Yeah. Well, right on. Well, yeah, thanks for coming down here, and for people looking to find y'all, just betterinoubackyard.com.
Yeah. And then a lot of our, we gotta revamp our website here in the next year. But yeah, most of our focus though is, with our messaging is on social media, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, or TikTok. And I probably got to get better on the Instagram reels, but yeah, that's where you can find us.
No, it's at minimum. I mean, LinkedIn, like I said, love following you all on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn's fun.
Yeah. No,
I never thought that would be, I always thought Facebook and Instagram and other platforms would be better, but LinkedIn is really, I never would have thought LinkedIn would be our main source of communication.
Well, thanks for coming by, and hopefully we can do some more together here.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, thanks for the opportunity to do this. This is pretty cool to see. I've been watching your show for a while, so this is awesome.
Yeah.